All right, so get this. We're diving deep into Singapore today. Their drug laws, man. You hear about them, but it's like, whoa, seriously intense stuff.
Yeah, it's quite a different world over there.
We're talking about like BBC News and Mary Jane articles, and it's not just the laws on paper, you know? Real people, real stories, real consequences.
It's definitely a system that makes you think.
So let's get right into it. First things first. When we say Singapore has a zero tolerance policy, I mean, what does that even look like in action?
Well, they're not messing around, like, at all. We're talking death penalty for trafficking certain amounts, heroin, cocaine, cannabis, meth. Doesn't matter.
Whoa. Okay, so not just like a scare tactic. This is for real.
Oh, yeah, they're serious.
Yeah.
And just recently, on October 16th, they carried out another execution. It's definitely a live issue.
Wow. I mean, I guess that's what makes this deep dive so important, right?
Yeah.
Understanding the system like from the inside out.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating how they justify it. Their government argues that these tough laws are the reason they have such low drug crime rates.
So it's like, hey, look at our streets, safe and sound. This is why.
Exactly. They believe it protects their citizens, maintains order, and keeps society functioning smoothly. Of course, not everyone agrees.
And that's where the whole debate comes in, right? Individual freedom versus like societal good. It's a tough one.
It is, and it's playing out all over the world, actually. You've got places like the U.S. moving towards decriminalization, even full-on legalization in some states. But Singapore, nope, holding strong to their approach.
And that's where this story, Kim's story from the BBC article, gets so interesting.
Oh, yeah, her case is like a magnifying glass on the whole system.
Because she's just this like regular young professional, not some kingpin or anything, right?
Right, and she was supplying cannabis to her friends, but it wasn't some big operation, just casual sharing.
And that's where things get kind of crazy because even that in Singapore can land you in huge trouble.
Absolutely. They have these very specific limits on how much you can possess, and once you go over that, boom, presumed to be trafficking, whether you meant to tell it or not.
So in Kim's case, we're talking, what, a minimum of 5 years?
Yep, at least 5. And it could go up to 20. It's a lot, you know.
And here's the crazy part. Her friends, the ones she supplied, they were treated totally differently.
Exactly. Because they were seen as just consumers, they got sent to rehab for 6 months, no criminal record. It's a whole different track.
So it's like, you're a supplier, bam, punished. You're a user, okay, we'll try to help you.
It's a two-tiered system.
Yeah.
And it's definitely a shift from how they used to handle things. Now there's a much bigger focus on rehab and getting people back into society, but only for users.
Okay, so let's talk about this rehab then. The Drug Rehabilitation Center, or DRC, not exactly a spa day, right?
No, not at all. I mean, it's run by the prison service, barbed wire, cameras everywhere. Pretty intense.
And thousands of people going through this every year. The article said almost 4,000 inmates in December 2023. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's a big operation. And they have different institutions within the DRC. For first and second time offenders, it's Institution S1.
So what's that like? I mean, what are we talking about here?
Well, think basic, like 7 or 8 guys to a cell, sleeping on mats, 6 hours a day in these psych courses, learning about addiction, coping mechanisms, all that.
It sounds pretty rigorous. I mean, I guess the question is, how effective is all this? Is it actually changing people, or is it just punishment in disguise?
Well, that's the debate, isn't it? Is it
Right.
truly about rehabilitation, or is it more about, like, scaring people straight, keeping them in line?
It's hard to say for sure. But then there's Jean's story, right? The guy caught at home with meth, his mom, heartbroken. It just reminds you that this isn't some abstract policy. It's real people's lives.
And John's story is actually a good way to talk about the whole mandatory rehab thing. Because studies are finding that forcing people into treatment, it's not actually that different from when they choose to go themselves.
Really? That's
Hey.
surprising. I would have thought people would have to, like, want to change for it to work.
It seems like it's more complicated than that. And it kind of reflects a bigger change happening in Singapore. They're still super tough on trafficking, but they're starting to see drug use as a health problem too, not just criminal.
So less about locking everyone up, more about figuring out how to help.
Yeah, exactly. And one big change is that now, if you complete the DRC program, you don't get a criminal record. That's huge for getting your life back on track.
Makes sense. But Kim, the supplier, she is still facing serious time, right?
Yeah, her situation is different.
Yeah.
And it highlights this whole tension between keeping things safe and, individual rights.
It's a tough balance. And it's not just about the laws themselves, it's everything that comes after. Reintegration, surveillance, even those crazy urine supervision cubicles.
Oh, yeah, those are something else.
I mean, you're talking high-tech drug testing booths, but then they're playing Mr. Bean videos while you wait. It's just wild.
It is.
Yes.
But it shows how seriously they take this monitoring stuff. And it's not without controversy, of course.
I bet. Because it feels like you're always being watched, right? Never really free.
That's the criticism. Groups like the Transformative Justice Collective say it actually makes things harder. All this scrutiny, this stigma, it doesn't really help people move on.
So it's this whole complicated system, and then you add in the mandatory reporting thing where doctors have to tell on you if you admit to using drugs. I mean, that's got to scare people away from getting help.
It does. And it kind of highlights the dilemma, right? Trying to keep people safe, but also like respecting their choices, their privacy. It's a tough line to walk.
It really is. And it all circles back to Kim, right? She was just trying to help her friends, and now she's facing years in prison. It's a heavy reminder that these laws have real consequences for real people.
Absolutely. And it's not just Singapore dealing with this whole drug thing. It's a global issue. So many different approaches, so many different opinions.
It's true. And Singapore's way, it's definitely one of the most extreme. It makes you think, right, is this the answer? What are the trade-offs? We've got a lot to unpack, so stick with us as we keep digging into this fascinating world of Singapore's drug laws. So we're talking about this whole system in Singapore, right? It's not just about the punishment, it's also about what happens after. Like, okay, you've been through the DRC, now what?
Yeah, reintegration, that's a whole other layer of this thing.
Because going back to the real world, that's got to be tough, right?
Yeah.
All those temptations, the pressure. How do you stay on track?
Well, one thing they focus on a lot is job assistance.
Oh, right. Like get a job, get stable, that kind of thing.
Exactly. They figure if you've got work, structure, a paycheck, you're less likely to fall back into old habits.
It makes sense. But on the other hand, there's also all this surveillance, right? I mean, the BBC article mentioned a guy who was electronically monitored for 2 years after getting caught with heroin.
Yeah, that's part of it too. They've got these supervision centers keeping tabs on people.
So it's like you're out, but you're not really out. Still under the microscope.
That's one way to put it. And it definitely raises questions, how much freedom do you give up? How much control is too much?
Right. It's like, are you ever really free? And then you add those urine supervision cubicles into the mix. It's like something out of a movie.
Those are pretty wild, yeah.
I mean, they've got this whole high-tech system for drug testing, but then they're playing Mr. Bean videos while you wait. I don't even know what to make of that.
It's definitely an interesting combination.
Yep.
But I guess it shows how seriously they take this whole monitoring thing. Trying to make it efficient, foolproof.
I guess so.
Yeah.
But I can't help but wonder, like, psychologically, what's that do to a person? Knowing you're constantly being watched, does that really help you change? Or does it just create more resentment?
Yeah, that's a valid point. And some people argue that it actually backfires, makes reintegration harder.
Oh, yeah, the Transformative Justice Collective. They were talking about that, right? Saying that all this scrutiny just adds to the shame, the stigma.
Exactly. Like you're already trying to rebuild your life, and now you've got this constant pressure, this feeling that you're never really trusted. It can be a lot to handle.
Makes sense. And then there's the whole thing with doctors having to report you if you admit to using drugs. I mean, come on. Who's going to ask for help if they know they'll get in trouble?
That's the problem, right?
Yeah.
It creates this huge barrier. People are scared to reach out, even when they need it most.
So it's like they're trying to help, but they're also making it harder to get help. It's a weird paradox.
It is, and it all comes back to this balancing act,
Yeah.
keeping people safe, but also respecting their choices, their privacy. It's not an easy line to draw.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Singapore's approach, it really forces us to confront these questions,
Yeah.
because they've gone all in on this control thing. But is it working? Is it ethical? What's the cost?
It's a good question. And I think it's important to remember that Singapore is not the only country grappling with this. The whole world is trying to figure out this drug thing, and there's no easy answers.
Right, everyone's got their own approach, their own ideas. And Singapore's way, it's definitely one of the most, shall we say, unique. It's definitely food for thought, right? Like,
Okay.
is this a model for others to follow? Or is it a cautionary tale? There's a lot more to unpack here, so stay tuned as we keep digging into this fascinating world of Singapore's drug laws. So we spent all this time, looking at Singapore's drug laws, the penalties, the rehab, the surveillance. It's definitely a system with a message.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about that.
And Singapore, their government, they're pretty clear about what that message is, right? They believe this tough stance, even the death penalty, is the reason they've got such low drug crime.
That's their argument, for sure.
And a lot of people in Singapore, they agree. They want safe streets. They want to protect their families. It's hard to argue with that, right?
It is a powerful argument, but there's another side to it, too.
Right. The critics, they say the cost is too high. That this system is just too harsh, too inhumane.
Exactly. And using the death penalty. That's a huge sticking point. A lot of people see it as plain wrong, a violation of basic human rights.
And there's also the question of whether it actually works as a deterrent. I mean, some studies say it doesn't really make that much of a difference.
Right, there's definitely debate about that. And critics also point out that Singapore's system, it seems to punish the small-time offenders the most, the people struggling with addiction. But the bigger issues, the things that lead people to drugs in the first place, those aren't really addressed.
So it's like they're focused on the symptoms, not the cause.
Yeah, kind of. And we heard from groups like the Transformative Justice Collective. They're pushing for a different approach, more compassion, more focus on rehab and harm reduction.
So it's like, yeah, keep people safe, but also understand why they're using drugs, help them deal with those underlying problems.
It's a more nuanced view,
There you
for
go.
sure. And this is where Singapore, they're kind of bumping up against the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
Because globally, things are shifting.
Right, toward decriminalization, looking
Mhm.
at drug use as a health issue.
Exactly. And Singapore, they're sticking to their guns, this very strict model.
Hmm.
It makes you wonder, are they going to be left behind?
Or maybe they've got something figured out that the rest of the world hasn't. It's hard to say. But this deep dive, it's been eye-opening, right? We've seen the impact of these laws on real people like Kim.
Her story is definitely a powerful reminder that this isn't just some abstract debate. It's about lives, families, communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've gotten a glimpse inside the DRC, this whole rehab system that's like a prison, but also trying to help people. It's fascinating, but also kind of unsettling.
It is, and I think the big takeaway is that there's no easy answers. This whole drug thing, it's complex. Every approach has its pros and cons.
So true. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the question we're left with is what's the right way forward? Can any one system really solve this problem? What can we learn from Singapore, both the good and the bad?
It's definitely something to think about. And for everyone listening, I'd encourage you to keep learning, keep questioning. This is a global issue, and we all need to be part of the conversation.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a wild ride.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep digging deeper. There's always more to learn,